Hi everyone. This is going to be the first lesson in VMware vSphere. I'm basically going to be blogging and recording the rebuild of my home lab. Check my site for some details on what my home lab consists of. I've already gone ahead and installed ESXi on one of my shuttle boxes. Unfortunately, because I don't have a console connection to that shuttle box, I was unable to record the installation. However, if you do a quick search on YouTube, I'm pretty sure you can find one out there. During the installation, I defined a password, a static IP address, some gateway information, a subnet mask, as well as some DNS information and a host name. Currently, we do not have DNS installed and configured, but we're going to go through that. So the first thing we want to do after installation is download and install the VMware vSphere client. If you've never done that before, you can just HTTPS into the IP address of your host, and there will be a link for download client. Let me demonstrate. As you can see, you get this VMware ESXi welcome page, and you can download the vSphere web client. You can also just go to vmware.com and download the latest client. You will need a matching client to your ESXi version. I've already gone ahead and downloaded and installed this. So we're going to want to launch our VMware vSphere client. We're going to want to specify the IP address of our host. Like I said, we do not have DNS configured as of yet. We're going to log in as root and use a password that was specified during installation. So as you can see, we're greeted by a VMware evaluation notice. I am using the built-in 60-day trial that comes with ESXi or vSphere, and you can go on vmware.com and download a trial. I'm going to click OK. And we're also greeted by this message is that our ESXi does not have persistent storage. My home lab servers boot off of USB keys, and as you can see in the summary tab, we have no storage, and we have no storage under data stores. For the purpose of this first lab, we're going to start off by creating a simple NFS mount on my Synology NAS box. My device is dual homed, so I have a production network and a storage network. Best practice is to have an isolated storage network, so we're going to go and we're going to use that. So let's see what we have under networking. So we have our default management network with our default vmkernel port. This is the IP address that we're using to manage the box. So we're going to want to create a secondary vmkernel port to be used for NFS. So let's take a look at what we have. So I have one NIC assigned right now, but I have two additional NICs. So I'm going to use one of these two NICs to connect to my storage. So most importantly is you're going to want to have a good diagram of what your connections are. So I know that both my VM1 NIC is capable of connecting to my storage. But let's check that out. So I'm going to connect to my switch. So I'm using a Cisco SG310 layer 3 switch. Layer 3 meaning capable of it's doing inter-VLAN routing. So let's go ahead and log into that. So because I have my lab well documented, I know that my VMNIC1 connects back to gigabit interface 4 on my switch. But all good admins should make sure that they create proper labels on their ESXi host. And as you can see, I have an ESX01 add-on NIC port 1 configured there. So one quick way to find out is to quickly create a new network. So we're going to do that by clicking Add Networking. We're going to just choose a default virtual machine. We're going to choose all the defaults. I'm going to show you why. Because we're using Cisco switches, they're capable of CDP, and you want to make sure CDP is enabled. By default, CDP is enabled on your vSphere standard switches. If we click on this small call-out box, we can see the CDP information, and we can see that our port ID goes back to gigabit interface 4. So that matches what we have there. So that's a good way to find out what else you have configured. And as you can see, just to define that, we're going to go on VM switch 0, look at our VMNIC 1, or excuse me, VMNIC 0. Take a look at what we have there, and we're going back to gigabit interface 2. And we have that properly documented here in our switch. So now we're going to define a VLAN. For my home network, I use VLAN 100 for storage. So let's make sure gigabit Ethernet interface 4 is capable of using VLAN 100. So in my switch, unfortunately, it has a light version of the CLI, and most administration needs to be done through this web interface, which isn't the worst thing on earth. It's pretty easy, actually. So let's go to the interface settings. Let's take a look at what we have. So GI4 is a trunk port. So trunk port meaning that it's capable of carrying more than one VLAN, but that also means that we need to tag VLANs. So let's see what membership gigabit Ethernet 4 has. So right now it's a trunk port, but it's only carrying one VLAN, and it's an untagged VLAN. So this is basically the administrative VLAN. So any frame that comes untagged will be automatically put on VLAN 1. So let's add VLAN 100 to that. And as you can see, I have VLAN 100 defined. Its VLAN name is storage. So in the SG300 interface, this is not my favorite interface, but basically we're going to say VLAN 100, and we're going to look at GI4 or GE4 as defined here. And right now it's set to excluded. So we're going to want to set that to tagged. And as you can see, GE6 already has it tagged, and that is the connection back to my Synology NAS device. So we already know that that's up and running. So we're going to hit apply. And if we go back to the port VLAN membership, we now see that VLAN 100 is allowed, and it needs to be tagged. So as you can see, 1UP VLAN 1 untagged PVID. That means it's the system VLAN or default. So now that we have that, let's go back to our configuration. So let's go to the properties of this vSwitch. We're going to remove this port group, which we do not need. We're going to add a new port group. We want a vmkernal port group. And as you can see, it says the vmkernel TCP/IP stack handles traffic for the following services: vSphere vMotion, iSCSI, NFS, and host management. So for our purposes, we want NFS, but you do not need to define that. I'm going to click next. We're going to want to give this a network label. Make your network labels useful. So we're going to call this NFS. VLAN ID. So because we're using a trunk port, we need to tag these frames. So we're going to want to label this as VLAN 100. So all frames coming out of this vSwitch get tagged with the destination for VLAN 100. We are not specifying vMotion, we are not using this for fault tolerance, and we are not using this for management traffic. So let's click Next. We're going to want to define an IP address. My range for storage is 10, 10, 100, and it's a /24. So I'm going to define for this host 100.101 with a subnet mask of 255.255.0 or a /24. Do not modify the gateway information or else you'll lose connectivity to your host. Remember, this is a non-routed. You want this to be a layer 2 connection. If at all possible, you do not want to be routing NFS. Click Next. Click Finish. Great. So now we have our NFS VM kernel port up and running. But how do we know it's working? Well, let's see if we can ping the NAS server. In order to do that, we're going to want to go to PuTTY and connect to our host. Connection refused. So by default, SSH is disabled on a host. So let's click OK. Exit out of this. And we're going to want to go to Security Profile and enable SSH. Under Security Profile, under Services, I'm going to go to Properties. We're going to go to SSH. And we're going to check out the options on that. So we have 3 options here. We can start and stop if ports are open or closed. I don't really see this used. We can start and stop with the host, which is probably what I'm going to go with. And we can start and stop it manually. Because my home lab is not a high security environment, we're just going to start and stop this with the host. So we're going to set that as our default. Click Start, click OK, and click OK. Great, so we've turned on SSH server, so let's try our connection again. So let's go ahead and launch PuTTY. We're able to get a login prompt now. Let's log in as our root account. Tad bit of a delay. I've seen this in the past. It might be because we do not have DNS up and running, so we'll have to look into this a little deeper once we have DNS up and running. Use our password. Great. So let's try to now do a ping to our NAS device. So we're going to want to do a VMK ping, and this basically allows you to specify which VM kernel port we're going to use. So as you can see back here, we have 2 VM kernel ports, VMK0 for management and VMK1, which we've defined for NFS connectivity. So let's use VMK1. So let's look at what options we have. Just enter a VMK ping. And the option that we want is we want a capital I and the interface. So let's do a VMK ping, capital I, VMK1, and then an IP address. Great, we have connectivity. So let's minimize this for now. So we're going to connect to an NFS mount. So let's take a look at what we have configured. I'm going to connect over to my Synology disk station. I'm going to connect over to my Synology disk station. Well, I'm going to connect over to my Synology. I'm going to connect over to my Synology disk station now. So we're going to already have a shortcut for it. It's got a great web interface. I'm I personally name mine Storezilla. We're going to log in under our user account. Mine is vlogic. Very nice interface. So let's take a look at what we have created. So if we go into Storage Manager, we can see I have 2 volumes set up. I have a SHR volume, which is Synology's proprietary RAID technology, where I have 6 2 terabyte disks configured. So I have 1 disk of fault tolerance. It's very similar to RAID 5. And then I have my 2 SSDs under volume 2 under RAID 0. I have no protection on here. I purely want speed out of these. So it's very important that we're backing this data up, and we'll see in later lessons I'm going to be backing this up using VDP. Great. So now let's take a look at what we have in terms of file share setups, because NFS is a file share at the end of the day. So for that, we go into the control panel and we go into the shared folders. As you can see, I have a bunch of them that I use for personal use. But in this case, I have an NFS tier 2. And if we look at quick look at NFS tier 2, we'll see that I have it going to my SATA disk. But I want to use my SSDs. So in order to do that, I'm going to create a new share. I'm going to click Create. And I'm going to call this NFS_Platinum. It's very important that you pay attention to the cases that you're using, because NFS is case sensitive. And we're going to call this NFS mount. And we're going to create a description of it, NFS mount on SSDs. And we're going to want to choose our volume 2 location, which is our SSD drives. And we're going to keep the defaults and click OK. Great. We don't want any of these privileged. These are all Windows SMB privileges. We're not really worried about these. So now we're going to click on our NFS Platinum share. We're going to go to privileges and we're going to look at the NFS privileges. So by default we have none. So let's create some privileges. By default, everyone is going to be denied access. So we're going to be managing this pretty much like an ACL, if you're familiar with those. So let's create a privilege. So for the purposes of my home lab, again, I am using VLAN 100, which is 10.10.10. Excuse me, 10.10. For the purposes of my home lab, I'm using VLAN 100. For the purposes of my home lab, I'm using VLAN 100, whose network is 10.10 100.0, and it's a /24. So I'm going to allow any device on that subnet to have access to this NFS export. So let's define that. We're going to do 10.10.100.0, and we're going to define /24. This is a much better way to do it, rather than going in there and typing in 10, 20, 30 IP addresses, depending on how many you have. We're going to want to give any devices on that network read and write access. We're going to want to define root squash as map to admin. What root squash means is, by default, users will NFS clients will try to connect to the NFS export as root, and it is basically squashing access. So we're going to want to map root to an admin account. So in some Unix terms, you hear this as no root squash or do not squash root. After that, we're going to specify everything else as default. Click OK. And as we can see, we want to make note of our mount path. Click OK. And remember, this is case sensitive. Great. So we should have a NFS mount up and running. So let's minimize this and try that out. So we're going to want to go to storage now, and we can either choose add storage here or add storage here. Let's choose this guy since he seems to be the one complaining. And we are going to be using NFS, so we're going to want to use the network file system option. I want to click next. We're going to specify an IP address. You can use DNS. In most cases, I do see IP addresses still used. And we're going to want to define our server interface, and that's 10.10.100.100. And we're going to want to specify our folder. As we noted before, it's volume2 / capital NFS _ platinum. And you know what? For the sake of this demo, I'm going to show you that it is case sensitive. So I'm going to do an M in lowercase. And if we go back to our NFS mount, we can see that this NFS mount is all capital letters. So we're going to try that. We're going to just call this NFS _ platinum. This is going to be the name reflected in ESXi. And this does not have to be all capital letters. This does not have to match. I'm just going to copy and paste this for later use. So as you can see, we're going to use a lowercase m, and I'm expecting this to fail. Great. Got an error. Mount requested, denied by NFS server. Check that the export exists and the client has permission to mount it. Very generic. You'll get that error pretty much if there's many things wrong. So let's click close and do this right now. Let's click here to add a data store. I'm going to choose NFS again. We're going to type in the IP address. We're going to use volume2. And we're going to copy and paste our properly formatted NFS name. Click next, click finish. Ta-da, we have a NFS mount. And as we can see, we have the device information, we have the capacity, we have the type is NFS, and my array does not support NFS VAI offload, which is why we're probably going to be using iSCSI in future demos. Great, so we have that up and running. Let's get a server up and running now. So first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to get some ISOs out there. So how do we get some ISOs out there? So let's browse to our data store. Let's create a folder. We're going to name this ISO. And let's go in there. And let's upload a file. So I have a share out of my Synology NAS. So we're kind of going the long way, but let's go in there. And we have a folder called Operating Systems. And let's go to our Microsoft directory. And we have our Windows Server 2012 trial. Let's upload that. This is going to take a while. This is likely going to take a while, so let me pause the recording for a bit and then come back to it. Great, so our ISO upload has finished and we're ready to deploy a virtual machine. So let's exit out of this. Let's go to the summary tab. Let's take a quick look at the virtual machines. As you can see, we have none, so let's start by creating one. So let's right click on our host, create a new virtual machine. We're going to use the typical settings for this. We're going to click next. This is going to be our domain controller. So let's start off by calling this one DC. I like to keep things very simple in my lab. Click next. We only have one destination for this virtual machine, which is our NFS mount. So we're going to use NFS Platinum Data Store. We are going to be deploying Windows Server 2012, which only comes in a 64-bit edition. we're going to be connecting to this to our VM network, which is my production network, pretty much the standard thing that you find behind a router, a 192.168.1.x. And we're going to change our adapter to VMXNet 3. We'll talk a little bit about adapters later on, but we want the latest and greatest. And you want to make sure your operating system uses this. As you can also see, there is a knowledge base article link regarding networking performance and the different adapter types and compatibility. So we're going to use that for now. I'm going to click Next. By default, anything on an NFS mount is thin provisioned. Right now the default size is 40 gigs. That should be more than enough. We're just going to use the default. And we're going to hit Finish. So right now, basically what we have is an empty shell that has the proper virtual hardware required to run a Windows Server 2012 operating system. So let's edit what we have here. So 4 gigs of RAM sounds good. 1 vCPU sounds good. I don't, it's my home lab. I don't really need much more than that. I probably don't want this floppy drive. I'm just going to remove that. So we're going to have to plug in some install media. So let's plug in some install media. So we're going to want to click on CD DVD drive. We're going to want to choose our data store ISO file. And again, we only have one data store, so let's browse over to our ISO folder, choose our Server 2012 media. We're going to want to connect this at power on. I want to click OK. So let's open up a console window to our new server DC, which is going to be our domain controller, DNS, and certificate server, as well as our DHCP server. So it's going to be pretty busy. Let's open it up. Let's power it on. And as we can see, the VM is booting off the ISO that was mounted, and the Windows Server 2012 installation is starting. So let's click Next. You will notice, because we don't have VMware tools installed, the mouse can be a little jumpy. So kind of just fight through it. We're going to be using the standard edition. We don't really need any of the features in Data Center edition. You could probably just check a Microsoft.com for some key differences. But we're going to be using standard evaluation mode. So I downloaded a 180-day trial. I do not have a license copy. And I'm going to be using server with GUI. I do not want the core installation. I'm just not that good at the command line in Windows to use that kind of install. I'm going to click Next. We're going to accept the licensing terms. And we're going to be doing a custom. We're going to actually be installing. So we're going to install on that 40 gig hard disk that we gave this virtual machine. So this is going to take a little bit of time. I'm going to pause the recording, and I'll be back in a few. So our install is finished up. First thing we need to do is set a password. Microsoft by default does require a pretty complex password. As you can see, I will try something which is actually somewhat complex, but it says that it does not meet the requirements. So I'm going to use an ultra complex password. So now it's finishing up. And we're going to log into our new machine. So we can hit Control Delete here, and Control Alt Insert also works. I am actually recording off a virtual machine on VMware Workstation. So if I press Control Alt Insert, unfortunately it will lock the computer I am recording on. So first thing I like to do is change my time. And I'm just going to change this to Eastern Time. And I personally like to use the same NTP server. I've been accustomed to using pool.ntp.org. And I'm going to do that. And as you can see, our time is not matching because we do not have VMware tools configured or installed, excuse me. So let's go to VM, guest, install VMware tools. It will basically insert the virtual CD-ROM containing the VMware tools installation. As you can see, Windows has detected this CD-ROM is installed, and we're just going to run the setup. So now you can navigate to it and run setup.exe. It's a 64-bit operating system, so we should be running setup 64. However, if you run the 32-bit executable, it will automatically call the 64-bit executable, so don't worry too much about that. However, if you are on a 32-bit operating system and you call a 64, I don't believe it will do the same. So we're going to use typical, just typical settings for VMware tools. It's actually installing the driver for the VMXnet 3 Ethernet adapter I installed before. That is the driver that is not installed by default, so we would have no network connectivity. And that's the reason pool.ntp.org was not working either. So we're going to restart. Great. So now our time matches. That is the time I have in my home. Let's log back in again. And probably we're going to start with some routine maintenance tasks. I'm going to start by patching this server. So we're going to go to local server. We're going to go to Windows Update. And we're going to just turn that on. I just like to make sure that I'm running the latest patches. Not really because I'm as concerned in my home lab about security vulnerabilities as I am any known fixes. So I'm going to turn on automatic updates. This is going to run for a bit, so I'm going to pause recording, fully patch my machine, and then come back. So now our Windows system has been fully patched. Let's log back in and finish our configuration. We'll go to the local server. First things first, let's change this name. Because this is going to be my domain controller and I like to keep things very simple, I'm just going to name it DC. We're not going to restart now. We are also going to go from a DHCP address to a static IP address. I'll be using static IP addresses for my servers. As you can see, we have our VMXnet 3 Ethernet adapter that we chose during installation. We are going to go to the properties of this, and we're going to disable IPv6. And we're going to assign an IP address. My main production network basically comes off my my FiOS router, so I'm going to use the standard 192.168.1.x network. Use my default gateway, and because it's going to be our DNS DHCP server, I'm going to have it point to itself for DNS name resolution, and then at a later point we'll configure a forwarder so it can get access to the internet as needed. As the alternate DNS server, I am going to just put the my router, which also acts as my DNS server. Alright, so we're just going to quickly reboot, let our name change take effect. We could actually bypass it if we want, but I like to do things a little clean. Just so you know, a quick thing with Windows Server 2012 or Windows 8, if you hit Windows key C, it brings up the charms. It's kind of hard to kind of put your cursor in the corner at times to get that charms menu to come up, so I find that to be a pretty good tip. Before I forget, as a little maintenance, I'm going to go and edit the VM settings, and I'm going to disconnect that Windows Server 2012 ISO from the machine. Let's log back in, and now we're going to promote this to a domain controller. So first things first, let's make sure this bad boy can get on the network. Let's bring up the command prompt and ping the router. Great. And maybe we'll ping that NFS server. Great. So I'm able to reach all those. So in order to do that, we're pretty much going to go through the wizard. We're going to configure this. We've configured the local server, changing the name, running Windows updates, giving it a static IP address. So now we're going to add some roles and features. So we're going to do we're going to add a role. We're going to use this computer to add the role to, and we're going to go with Active Directory Domain Services, and it's going to give you any prerequisites that are required for Active Directory. We're going to work with some other roles, but we'll install those later on. And we're going to just use all the defaults, and we're going to actually even have it restart automatically. And we're going to do an install. And keep in mind, this is installing the role. We have not made it a domain controller as of yet. What this does is it pretty much stages all the binaries required for it to be a domain controller. So this will only take a minute. As you can see, that's complete. We're going to click close, and as you can see from this exclamation point, we now have a post-deployment configuration required notification, excuse me. So now we're going to promote this to domain controller. This is the first domain controller in a new forest, so we are going to be adding a new forest. And my root domain, which is going to be my only domain, I'm going to call it lab.local. And because it's going to be the only domain controller, we're going to run it at a 2012 forest functional level and domain functional level. It appears to be thinking about something, so I'm unable to type anything at the moment. Not quite sure what it's thinking about. Alright, it's done thinking. We're going to create a directory services restore mode password. If we ever needed to restore Active Directory configuration, this password would be required. So if you're a Windows Active Directory administrator, you should be very familiar with this. So we'll use a password. I like to use the same password that I use for administration in my lab. If you were working in an enterprise, this is something that should be very different than your day-to-day password, and should be probably locked up in some sort of vault. We're going to click next. We do not have a delegation because we have no parent server that can issue this delegation. Our NetBIOS domain name is lab, or a short name, you know. Many of you are familiar with domain name / versus a username at domain. So it would be lab / vlogic versus vlogic at lab.local. Normal best practices dictate that we put these on different spindles for performance. Again, this is a lab environment, so everything's going on C. And we're going to click next. And I'm going to let this run for a bit. I'm going to pause the recording, and when we get back, it should be complete. Great, so our DC promo has completed, and our system has rebooted. So let's log in. So as you can see now, we're referencing lab, and my default username is administrator. So it is our one and only active account on the domain. So probably the first thing I'm going to do is I am going to lower my password complexity policy. I really don't need complex passwords on my home lab, and to be honest with you, it's just a pain to type that many characters and combinations of letters and numbers. So we're going to wait for Server Manager to come up, and we're going to change. So we're going to go to Tools, and we're going to want the Group Policy Editor and Group Policy Management. And here it is. And what we want to edit is our default domain policy. And that, I believe, is under Policies, Administrative Templates, System. Nope, blank. Alright, so our DC promo has gone through, our domain controller has been rebooted, and let's go ahead and log in. As you can see now, we see lab administrator. So let's log in with our administrator account. Our local account has now become the domain admin for this brand new domain. So the first thing I'm probably going to want to do is I am probably going to want to lower the password complexity requirements for my domain. It's my home lab. I really don't need anything that complex. It's just a bit of a nuisance. So in order to do that, we need to edit the default domain policy. So let's go to Group Policy Management. To our default domain policy, we're going to right click and edit, and under computer configuration, still not sure why that makes sense, but we're going to go under Windows settings, security settings, and account policies, and password policy. So we're going to want to reduce this password complexity. We're going to disable that. And we're probably going to have a maximum password age of, we're not going to define it. We need to change this. We need to, oh, that was changed for us. Great, so they're not defined, so our password should not need to expire, or we won't be prompted for password changes. And let me just lower this to 5. Great. So now let's create a new administrator account, because I don't like typing the word administrator, it's too long. So under users, let's create a new user. Let's create one for myself, and we'll call him vlogic. Let's see if I still use a pretty long password. It's just not a complex password, to be honest with you. Oh, unfortunately, because we're on a single domain, I'm going to have to log off and log back in. And how do I log off? Interesting. I don't know that I ever log off. In order for that change to take effect, I just do need to log off and log back in. Let's try this one more time. We're going to create a new user. That's interesting. So, let's try one more thing. This shouldn't make a difference. Oh, I'm sorry. I know a command I'm missing. We need to do a GP update. By default, I believe it updates every 15 minutes. Let's try this one more time. This time around, I'm going to try a slightly... No, let's not try a variation on that password. Great. Okay, so we just need to do the GP update. So we're going to make this account a member of domain admins. We're going to make it a local administrator and an enterprise admin. And to be quite honest, we probably only needed administrators, but it's a bit overkill, but I guess the job done. Alright, let's log off and make sure that this account is able to log into the domain controller. Excellent. So I think the only remaining item that we have is enabling remote desktop, because I do not want to be tied to a console all the time. So let's go to remote desktop and allow connections. And we don't need this. And because my account is a administrator, I should by default have access to connect to this desktop remotely. So the next thing we want to verify is that we are able to get to this computer remotely via remote desktop. Gonna launch this. We're just gonna type in dc.lab.local, connect, Excellent, we are in. So let's just close out of that. And we're ready for the next step. Thank you. Great, so we've created an NFS mount, mounted that to our ESXi server, created a DNS server, created a domain controller, and we're able to access that remotely. For our next step, we'll be deploying the vCenter server appliance. Thank you for watching.